Let's take a look at the IELTS reading question type called diagram completion questions. First, let's just get familiar with the question a little bit. So on a diagram completion question, you will have some kind of visual diagram to look like. It may look something like this. Very often, the diagram completion question passages are scientific, or they describe some kind of factual information or some process of some kind. So this would be a standard kind of visual for IELTS reading that you see in front of you. And they're often quite simple, with a few labels and some imagery showing you things that are described in the passage. In this case, we're looking at a diagram from a science experiment. Okay, so you can see a few labels there. Ocean water over here to the right, sampling probe, electrical spark. Okay, we can expect that this information will be in the passage, or at least paraphrased in the passage, and then our job in this question type is to fill in the blanks. Okay, numbers 1, 2, and 3 we need to read to find what words to use to fill in this information. All right, some approaches to this question. Number 1, so generally you can expect that the information in the visual will be paraphrased from the text, okay? IELTS is not going to just give you a lot of the same words on the visual and that you found in the text describing the visual, okay? They're going to test your language by seeing if you can understand the paraphrases. So expect that the labels provided to you will be paraphrased in some way. They will often give you some of the same words so that it gives you a few clues of how to find the answers. But do expect that much of the language you see on the visuals will be paraphrased. Also, and just importantly, you can expect that the passage is going to describe some visual features of the diagram that are not labeled. Okay, so what do we mean by that? Well, let's take a look again at our scientific example. Okay, over here, over to the right with the green arrow, let's imagine that we have a text that reads this. Okay, the smaller spherical chamber contains salinated water. Let's imagine that that is something that is a sentence that is described or that is found in the reading passage we're reading for this visual. Okay, so we're pretending that sentence is in a passage we've read. All right, now if the passage says that, notice what it says, the smaller spherical chamber. Okay, that is not something that is labeled over here on the diagram. Okay, we're talking about this smaller circle here, this sphere, and that is smaller than this other sphere that is over here on the left side. I'm talking about this one over here, right? So the text may say something like the smaller spherical chamber, but there's no label for chamber or sphere on the visual itself. That is just visual information that that you're probably going to be asked to think about for answering some of the questions that are on the diagram. Okay, so for example, it looks like number 1 down there will require you to know what that spherical chamber is. Okay, now there will be clues, right? We have a label on the visual here where it says ocean water. Okay, that's a label on the visual, and that is something that is a paraphrase of this sentence we find in the text, salinated water. Okay, so an example of a paraphrase there, giving you a clue and letting you know where this smaller spherical chamber is and giving you some information about that, right? Okay, so if you know the word salinated and you know the word ocean water, then you can get that information easily, and you might have an easier time finding the smaller spherical chamber on the visual. Okay, now number 3, the last tip here for approaching this question type. So very often, almost all of the time actually, the information that you're going to use from the passage to answer these diagram completion questions, it's going to come from one small section of the passage, of the text, okay? So that means it can be a very good strategy to read that section slowly and carefully in order to find the answers to the text, okay? So instead of just scanning quickly and trying to search for each individual little answer on the diagram, if you find the section where those answers are contained, you may want to read that 1 or 2 paragraphs carefully and slowly in order to find the answers. Now, this depends. So if you only have 2 or 3 things to label on the diagram, only 3 questions out of your entire set of questions for the passage, maybe it's not worth the time to read that little section carefully. But if you have many to answer, it's very likely going to be a much better strategy to take your time with it and to spend enough time reading through the paragraph or the paragraphs that help you answer these questions in order to know what's there and to understand them completely. Okay, so think that through. Each time you come to one of these diagram questions, do you have time to read that little section carefully and very slowly, or do you need to scan for answers like you do for other questions? Okay, so that depends on what you're facing on each individual diagram question you might encounter. All right, now the last thing here to know, there are 2 types of diagram completion questions. The first type is like this, where you're going to have some answer choices in a box, okay? Very often, when you have the answer choices in a box that you have to select from in order to complete the diagram, the answer choices will be paraphrases, okay? So they're not going to just give you the same words found in the passage in the box there to choose from. You have to recognize paraphrases there, okay? Also, it could be that the map labels, the information or the language given to you on the map will also be paraphrases, okay? So this actually, with the box type, even though they give you the answers to choose from, and you can make some good guesses possibly, this can be a very difficult type of diagram completion question because so much of the language is likely to be paraphrased, okay? The second type is just a standard short answer question. You may have to select 1 word or 2 words from the passage in order to complete the diagram. It could be 3 words too, and a number or something like that. Okay, just like your regular short answer questions, you have to look at the directions to know how many words and numbers are possible to fill in for the short answers. For this one, just keep in mind when it says from the text or from the passage, okay, something like that, that means that the answers must come directly from the passage. Don't change them. Don't paraphrase them or use your own words. You make no changes to the words. Those words need to come directly from something you found in the reading passage itself. All right, now let's take a look at a sample question here, do a little practice to apply the strategies just a little bit. Here we have a diagram. This is a typical kind of IELTS diagram. It's not very detailed. The images are not extremely detailed, but there's just enough information there for you in order to read the passage and sort of understand what's there. Okay, so we're looking at the surface of Venus here, and we're going to read a section that describes a process of how the surface of Venus it came to be the way it is. Okay, so take a look at the diagram here. Notice we've got 2 sides here. We've got on the left side the surface of Venus in its current state, okay, the way that it is now. And then we have something called Turcotte's model. Okay, so that's something we can expect to read in the passage. So Just like you would for a question like this, take a look at the diagram, see what's there. What information do you need to find to fill in the blanks for the questions? Numbers 1, 2, and 3. That's the information you need to go look for as you search in the passage. Okay, so let's practice this a little bit. So in a second, I'm going to put up the diagram one more time, and I would invite you to pause the video and look down below in the notes section. There is a section of a passage that contains the information you need to answer these questions, okay? This is going to be the short answer type, and you should use no more than 2 words to fill in the blanks for the questions on this diagram. Okay, so when I put the diagram back up on the screen, go ahead and pause your video. Try to answer the questions by reading in the passage you see below. Okay, so let's do that now. Go ahead and pause your video. Okay, so you paused your video, and now let's go through and look at the answers for these. Hopefully you were able to find the answers and see how the diagram sort of uses paraphrasing to present the information you find in the passage in a slightly different way, using different words that you need to understand in order to answer the questions. Okay, so let's look at each question one by one and think about how to answer it. So number 1, a thick blank inhibits observation. Okay, we needed to find a paraphrase in the passage describing something thick that inhibits observation. What would inhibit? Well, inhibit means to prevent something, to prevent it from happening, right? To make it difficult to do something. And observation means that you're looking at something or you're studying it in some way. So what is it that we find in the passage that prevents being able to see something or to look at something? Well, we get that quite early in paragraph A, where we have this sentence. Unlike Mercury and Mars, Venus has a dense, opaque atmosphere that prevents direct observation of its surface. Okay, so it's the opaque atmosphere. Atmosphere would be an acceptable answer here all by itself, or since we're allowed to put 2 words in the answer, opaque atmosphere as the adjective for that atmosphere could also be included in the answer. That's what inhibits or prevents observation of Venus, and that's something we see labeled surrounding the planet on the diagrams there. Okay, so number 1, the best answer there is opaque atmosphere or just atmosphere. Okay, now as we continue into the passage, we get some description there of what the planet Venus looks like now, right? And the whole purpose of the passage is to try to think through, okay, how can we explain why the surface of Venus looks the way it does? Eventually, we're going to get to this side over here, the right side with Turcotte's model. But first, there's some description of what it's like now. We have this hardened lava river that's described in the passage, right? It's solidified lava as it's described. We also get a description of what it looks like with the answer for number 2. Numerous what? Numerous dormant blank. Dormant. Aha. IELTS is testing you on this word. What does dormant mean? Dormant is a difficult word to know. Dormant means inactive, not active, okay? If something is dormant, it is not doing anything. It's just staying the way it is, and it's not alive or it's not active in some way, right? So what do we get in the description of what Venus looks like today that would be dormant? All right, well, that language is paraphrased in the passage in part B here, in paragraph B. It says, the surface shows an unbelievable level of volcanic activity, more than 100 large shield volcanoes. And volcanoes is our answer that fits into answer choice 2 correctly there. You could also put the word shield there, since that's a descriptor of volcanoes. Okay, and it continues. It has many more, Venus has many more than Earth does. Okay, and a solidified river of lava longer than the Nile. Okay, that's where we get that description of that label of the solidified river, right? One more sentence. The entire surface is volcanically dead, with not a single active volcano. Okay, the surface of Venus is covered with numerous dead volcanoes, dormant volcanoes. That is information we get from this passage. We get the word volcanoes, which we need to keep in its same form. Remember, it said the answers need to come from the text, so we cannot change them around in any way. All right, so we need to have volcanoes, and if you added shield volcanoes, that would be marked correct as well. Okay, now the answer choice 3 asks us to think about Turcotte's model, and that we get in the next paragraph. Something grows and eventually breaks the surface. Okay, breaks through the surface of Venus. What's described that eventually that grows, okay, quite a bit, and then eventually causes the surface of Venus to break? All right, well, in the passage, we get that paraphrased here. While the surface is fixed, okay, it's not changing, it's not moving or doing anything, right? Volcanic pressure builds up inside the planet. Those arrows on the visual represent pressure pushing up against the surface of Venus. That's what's described here in paragraph C of the passage. At a certain point, the pressure ruptures the surface and the entire planet is recoated in lava in a massive planet-wide outburst of volcanism. Okay, so the best answer for this one, volcanic pressure or just pressure, would be a great answer. That's what builds up inside the planet. Now, you could also, I think an acceptable answer for this one would also be volcanism, okay? Because if you remember from the passage, it says that this thing grows and eventually ruptures the surface. Okay, well, volcanism technically could work for that, so IELTS would accept that as an answer. But the best answer is pressure, those arrows pointing up at the surface of the planet that are eventually going to break the surface and push through a lot of lava. And that was also labeled for you on the visual. So to review, some important things to remember about this question type. Usually the answers for this question type can be found in one section of the passage, so it might really pay off to read that section of the passage carefully and slowly in order to really understand what's there. Be strategic. You need to think through your timing, how much time you have, how many questions are in the diagram that you need to label to see whether it's worth it to you to spend all that time reading that section carefully. Okay, if there's too much information there, or if the section of the reading passage is too long and it's not going to pay off, then you're going to have to use your scanning techniques to find the answers like you do for other question types. The second thing here, expect paraphrases in the diagram labels, okay? Paraphrasing is all over these diagrams. It can be difficult words. They're testing you on your vocabulary knowledge. You're going to have to try to figure out from the words or from the context of the visual itself what you're looking at and how to label the missing elements that are on the diagram. And the last thing, the text will describe features of the visuals that are not labeled, okay? So expect that. That's something you get when you read through the passage carefully. You'll hopefully get a visual image from the reading that you can apply to the visual information that you have in the diagram to really make sense of it all and understand what you're looking at, okay? But like we saw earlier in the lesson, expect that some things will be described in the passage but not labeled in the diagrams. Okay, so this is our diagram completion question type for IELTS reading. You can find this question type on the academic and the general training versions of the exam. So now you know what to do and how to approach these questions when you encounter them on the test.